Welcome to the Plenary Research Session, Clinical Studies in the AD-PKD Registry, How You Can Impact Research. I'm Chris Rasconi, the Chief Research Officer for the Foundation. In this session, I'll provide general information related to clinical trials. Dr. Michael Mrugg will provide an overview of open clinical trials in the PKD space, and Elise Hoover, the Foundation's Senior Director of Research, will provide an update on the Foundation's AD-PKD Registry. In the next 10-ish minutes or so, I'll touch on three topics. The first will be a background on what clinical research is. Then we'll talk about what participation in a clinical trial looks like. And then we'll finish up talking about why participation in clinical trials are so important. So this slide represents this industry-sponsored Pkd treatment pipeline. Now, Dr. Mrugg will dive into the currently enrolling studies on this slide and talk about that later. But what I want to note here is that it's great to have a pipeline. You might notice that the pipeline is a little bit smaller than what we've seen over the past couple of years, as we've seen some late-stage failures. Michael will touch on these in a little bit more detail. But despite this, one of the things that we're seeing in other research efforts, particularly in the Polycystic Kidney Disease Outcomes Consortium, are more companies coming into the AD-PKD space and the PKD space in general. And that creates a lot of optimism for us that we'll see a growth in this pipeline over the next several years. And importantly, for this growth to occur, as many of you have already done, we're going to need to continue this ongoing collaboration between patients and families with PKD like yourselves and the industry and academic sponsors of these clinical studies. Now, in addition to industry-sponsored studies, there's a number of other academic-sponsored studies. These include some that are funded by the foundation that evaluate things like drug repurposing, but also other non-drug interventions for PKD, such as diet and lifestyle interventions. So now in the next few slides, what we want to talk about is what clinical research is. So there's broadly two types of studies that are highlighted here. There's observational studies. These are ones in which researchers analyze health data. They look for links between a diagnosis and disease progression or symptoms of quality of life. And then there's interventional studies. These are studies that test new ways to prevent, detect, or treat diseases. And it's important to note that an interventional study can be any approach to prevent, detect, or treat diseases. That includes drug therapies, but it also includes things like diet or lifestyle interventions and devices. Now, if we talk about clinical trials, just a strict definition of what a clinical trial is. These are studies in humans of new treatments or therapies for a disease. And they're done to ensure that treatment or intervention is both safe and effective. Now, one of the reasons we like to share this information with you and really look for collaboration in the population of folks with PKD is that under-enrollment is one of the most significant problems facing PKD drug development. That takes really two flavors. One is trials that just fail to recruit enough volunteers to complete the study. And then the second one is somewhat related but different, and that's failure to recruit patients quickly enough to make study completion feasible. So again, it's really important that if you're interested, that you participate in clinical studies. So that's what clinical trials are, and I think it's worth asking, in this vein. So why do some people choose to participate in clinical studies? So as we've begun using the AD-PKD registry to help connect patients enrolled in the registry to clinical studies, we've asked about folks' motivation for contributing. And here's what we've learned. First of all, as you can see on this slide, there's a range of motivations that for folks to participate in research. That said, looking at this, the majority of folks participate to contribute to advancing science and treatments. And access to specialists and the opportunity to try to innovate treatments are also major reasons that people share that they choose to participate in clinical studies. Now, I think probably many of you have likely heard this phrase, fill in the blank. This is a fill in the blank phase study. And so what we want to do on this slide is give a really quick overview of what the purpose is of the different phases of clinical study. So if you're considering participating, you understand, broadly what the purpose is. So the first phase of clinical studies are phase 1 studies. These are generally small studies. They're designed to gain an early understanding of the safety of a drug and its appropriate doses, and how the drug behaves in healthy people. So most phase 1 studies start at least in healthy people. Now, the next phase of clinical testing are what are called phase 2 studies. This is usually the first time a drug is studied in the patient population. So meaning the group of folks in whom that drug is intended to potentially be a treatment. These studies, I'd say, are moderate in size. They're designed to gain an understanding of the drug safety in the intended patient population or intended population for use, and to gain early signs of efficacy, or is the drug working, to really help determine whether the drug should be studied further and moved into phase 3 studies. Now, phase 3 studies, these are typically large studies. They're designed to clearly demonstrate that a drug is effective in treating disease and to further understand the safety of the drug. It's the result of the phase 3 studies that are used by the FDA for review and determining whether a drug should be approved to treat disease. So these are sometimes also called pivotal studies. And then in some instances, there are studies that are called phase 4 studies. These are conducted after a drug is approved, and they're really usually to further demonstrate a drug's efficacy. So this is the phase of the clinical studies. And now what we want to do is transition and talk about what does it look like to participate in a study. So the first step in participation is informed consent. This is where you as a participant learn from the study personnel exactly what being in a trial will look like, so you can decide from a position of really truly being informed if you want to participate in a study. Now, these consent forms are really, really crucial and really important to read, and they should include the following things listed here. I think importantly, they must include the procedures that you as a participant would undergo. They must include the risk for participation, along with any other important details. So it's important to read that informed consent and talk to the study team about it and get all your questions answered before deciding to consent or not. Now, the next thing to think about, another important consideration, are eligibility criteria for study participation. And these are used to determine whether or not you're eligible for a study. These eligibility criteria are basically characteristics that must be shared by all study participants. So there's some examples in the green box that are common eligibility criteria, like age, your diagnosis, your medical history. Current kidney function is a consideration for almost all clinical studies, as well as current medications. I think one of the things, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but clinical studies take a lot of time. They take a lot of effort from participants, and so as well as from the study sponsors. And so it's really important that the study be interpretable. And that's really where the eligibility criteria come in. They are there to ensure that the results of the study are due to what is under the control of the study. They really are critical for helping researchers achieve accurate and meaningful results. And importantly, it's important to note, and asterisk at the bottom of the slide, that all study criteria are approved by an independent ethics review board. So they're well vetted, and they're really there to ensure that the study is interpretable, and also that you're an appropriate candidate for a given study. And so what should you expect to participate in a clinical trial? So I think the biggest thing to know is that your biggest commitment is your time. So studies require your time for a variety of reasons. That can be study visits for checkups, that can be study visits for tests such as blood and urine tests, and study visits really for any procedure to monitor if the treatment is working and if it's safe. And so being able to commit your time is really critical, because the best way to get good results is for all participants to fully complete study visits and tests. And while just having said that participation and full participation is important, I think what's also really important to know is what's highlighted on the bottom of this slide, and that is participation is voluntary. So if at any time you've enrolled in the study, you no longer want to participate, you are free and welcome to remove yourself from the study, and you can do that by just reaching out to your study team, who will help you understand how to leave the study safely. Speaking of safety, let's talk about what are the risks involved in clinical trials. So these are obviously really important considerations. Say the risk for each clinical study is different, and like we mentioned in the talking about informed consent, researchers are required to tell you all of the possible known risks before you agree to participate in the study. That said, there are some typical risks for participation in studies. First one is just side effects of the medication or treatment being studied. Almost everything will have some side effect. Then there are unwanted events during the trial that can occur that may or may not be related to the study drug. And then finally, there's the failure of the treatment to work. I think importantly, though, is that during the course of the study, the research team will be continuously monitoring your health and safety, whether you're receiving the study drug or whether you're receiving a placebo. Placebo being if you're in a study with a controlled study with a comparator. A placebo is a sugar pill that looks like the study drug. It's so that the study personnel and even you yourself as a participant won't know what you're receiving. And then finally, when we think about study participation, your privacy and confidentiality are really, really critical. Study sponsors understand that you place great trust in them when you participate and share your data as part of participating. So all study sponsors take great efforts to protect your identity and data rigorously. I think there's 3 key things to consider in that. First is that when you consent, you'll be assigned a unique study identification number. All your personal identifying information, your name, your contact information, your address, your date of birth is separated from your study ID, and that's placed in a secure location. After that, all the data that's collected from you is only identified by your unique ID. We call this de-identified data. So when people talk about de-identified data, it means your personal information has been separated from that data. This data is also stored in a secure location, and that's a secure location that's separate from your personal identifiers. And then finally, when it comes to data analysis, only de-identified data is analyzed, and only rarely would a study team connect your name to your data, and that would only really be for safety reasons if there was a reason that they had to contact you for your own safety or to inform you of safety events in a study. And so I just want to wrap up my portion of the session by sharing this slide that I think highlights the development of treatments, that highlights that the development of treatments is really a collaboration between researchers, patients, collaborative groups like PKDOC and clinical study sponsors. So using tolvaptan in this case. So in the case of tolvaptan, many years ago, researchers, including the foundation's founder, Dr. Jared Grantham, developed data in animals that indicated that suppressing vasopressin may be a potential treatment for ADPKD. And that really provided sort of what we call that critical start to this journey, the reason to believe. So, hey, this is a reasonable approach and something that we have enough belief in that we're going to take it into studying it in humans. So after that, as you look across this slide from phase 1 to phase 3, you'll see that it was greater than a decade of clinical studies. Not all of them, but some of them are shown here, that highlight the incredible commitment of patients. So I think in that commitment is in terms of both numbers of participants as well as the time requirement for studies, some that are short, 5 to 8 weeks, but some that are very long, multiple years of commitment for participation. And I think that really highlights the role of you all as patients in fueling and facilitating the development of treatments. And I think the last really takeaway message here is that you're truly essential to the development of all treatments for PKD. And so with that, what I'd like to do is hand the session over to Dr. Michael Mrugh, who among other hats, chairs the scientific advisory panel of the foundation. Welcome, Michael.
Yeah, I would like to thank Dr. Rusconi for a nice introduction and for a very nice introduction of the important concept of the PKD treatment pipeline that stems from the discovery through the phase 1 to 3, the drug approval and post-marketing studies. Can I get next slide? Yeah. So I'm not going to talk about the individual components of this pipeline that were covered by Dr. Rusconi. Instead, I would like to focus on the studies that are recruiting or will be recruiting in the near future. And but before going there, next slide, I would want to mention studies that were not successful and point to the fact that the current successes, they rest on the shoulders of studies that have failed. And these are the examples of terminated studies, the studies that were stopped early and will not start again. It included the studies of sirolimus and everolimus, triptolide, venglustat, or lexivaptan. And these studies failed and were terminated either due to lack of efficacy, or they were issues with safety, or a high dropout rate. And in particular, I would like to focus or mention the alert and action studies that explored in phase 3 safety and effectiveness of lexivaptan. And this study was recently discontinued due to safety concern because liver toxicity differed little from therapy already on the market. So thank you all who participated in this study and all these studies that didn't help us to move forward directly and were terminated. So what are the studies from the PKD treatment pipeline that are currently recruiting? And I'll try to provide a quick overview and then discuss these studies individually. So one of them is the Pravastatin study in early ADPKD that is done by University of Colorado. The other bardoxolone metal that is done by many sites in the United States. Then the Regulus compound 8429 that is targeting microRNA, and then the behavioral or diet studies that are done at University of Colorado or in Australia. So let me discuss them specifically. So the Pravastatin. Pravastatin study is a repurposing study of effectiveness of Pravastatin, which is an FDA-approved drug for hypercholesterolemia. The study involves an oral drug, Pravastatin, use versus placebo on every day for 2 years. The study is looking for 200 participants who have ADPKD with total kidney volume over 500 milliliters, eGFR over 60, well-controlled blood pressure, and no recent use of tolvaptan, fibrates, niacin, or cyclosporin. The next compound that is being explored currently is RGLS8429, which is one of these compounds that target microRNAs. And it's a new compound that replaces recently studied RGLS4326. It's injected subcutaneously, and this is a phase 1 study of safety tolerability. And they are looking for 32 participants for this study. The participants should be 18 to 55 years of age with ADPKD diagnosis, eGFR more than 90, and BMI 18 to 35, and no current use of tolvaptan. The next compound investigated is bardoxolone methyl. It is studied in a Falcon study, which is a phase 3 study of safety and effectiveness of bardoxolone methyl. It uses this oral drug versus placebo. The drug is taken every day, and the study is going to last 2 years. The study is looking for 850 participants, 18 to 70 years old, with diagnosis of ADPKD, eGFR 30 to 90, well-controlled blood pressure, no current use of tolvaptan. Among the behavioral modification or diet modification studies, I would like to highlight the study of caloric restriction that is done by University of Colorado in Denver. It's a 2-year group-based behavioral weight loss intervention that is based on 30% reduction in caloric intake and increased physical activity. They're looking for 126 participants, 18 to 65 years old, with diagnosis of ADPKD and increased body mass index 25 to 45, with renal function eGFR over 30, height adjusted total kidney volume over 60, and no current use of tolvaptan. So I would like to also mention studies that are not yet recruiting, but will likely start recruitment in the near future. That includes the study of tolvaptan in ARPKD and the studies of metformin in ADPKD and hydrochlorothiazide in ADPKD. Since it's not much known yet about these studies, I want to point you to an excellent website, a resource provided by NIH called clinicaltrials.gov that allow you to explore over 400,000 studies in most countries. And you can basically explore this database by typing the condition. Here in this case, for example, polycystic kidney disease, and then looking at a subset of studies and looking at the studies that are recruiting or not yet recruiting. So you don't need to look at studies that were already completed, but only those that are looking for participants, for future or potential participants. And if you do that, what you will get on the next page, and this is just an example of the two top, slide back, please, of the next, of what you may see, the studies that are recruiting and the studies that are not yet recruiting, and details are provided in terms of what is the title of the study. So you may get some insight about what is the study and the location of the studies, And often for the studies that are not yet recruiting, the information doesn't include location or some other details may be missing. So, but you can click on the individual names of the studies and learn more about these trials. Now, it's maybe sometimes little confusing to navigate this website, and there is a lot of information provided once you start to look at the details of individual trials. So to make it easier for patients, PKD patients, to navigate which clinical trials they may be able to participate in, PKD Foundation has established the Clinical Studies tool that is an outstanding tool to navigate this field of clinical trials in ADPKD research. And Alice Hoover is going to cover this in greater detail in the following talk. Next. I would like to also want to mention that while most of the studies have been historically focused on autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease, now there has been a great progress in ARP, in the research of autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease, or ARPKD, looking at both the biomarkers of the kidney and the liver disease, establishing the databases, but also the first treatment trial using tolopten, which is not yet recruiting. Next slide. There are also multiple other studies that are going on that I didn't mention, that are looking at the pathobiology of ADPKD or ARPKD and the other molecular pathways that may be important for the disease pathogenesis, including repositories and registries. And one of them, the PKD Foundation ADPKD Registry, is a focus of the next talk by Alice Hoover.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Mrug. Hi, everyone. So now that we've heard about the clinical trials in the pipeline for PKD, we'd like to share with you some details of the Foundation's own research project. So we'll show what it looks like, how we try to return value to participants, and then some tools we've created to help make research more accessible. So why did the Foundation decide to build a registry? So this is a collection of individuals with a given disease who provide data on their experience. And what I'd like to do is talk about how it compares to a clinical study, which is a classic research design that hopefully you're familiar with, especially after Dr. Rasconi's talk. So in a clinical trial, you are limited to sign up based on inclusion criteria that Dr. Mrug pointed out in many of the ADPKD studies. However, in a registry, there are few limits to age or disease stage. In fact, in ours, anyone with a disease is invited to join. In a trial, there is a maximum number of participants, and ultimately the study will close for enrollment. But in a registry, if we can help it, the study never closes, and participants can continue to sign up as long as there's interest. The kinds of data you can collect in a clinical study are pre-selected based on the protocol. But in a registry, we have more flexibility to add new questions and year over year, repeat them, ask them in a different way, which is really exciting. One important similarity, though, of course, is this idea of confidentiality. Dr. Rasconi walked us through what that looks like. And both clinical trials and registries will separate data from identifying factors like your name. And I'll talk a little more about why this is a little different in the registry later. Okay, there are also different kinds of registries. So traditionally, clinic-based registries pull data from your electronic health record. And the only opportunity you have to engage with the researchers is when you sign that consent form. The data itself also largely focuses on tests and procedures from the clinic. However, in a patient-powered registry like ours, we use what are called PROs, or patient-reported outcomes. And this data is provided directly by patients. And because we're doing that, we rely really heavily on engagement with the registry. So we ask people to continue to log in and come back and answer more questions. We can also collect data that's very unique, such as quality of life, pain, fatigue, that is really hard to get from the electronic health record. So in the Foundation's history, we have committed to funding and supporting research. And this is the first research project that we have managed ourselves. So we're really excited about it. It was launched almost 3 years ago on PKD Awareness Day. It's hosted online. And we hope that the goals of the program will go far to help advance research to find better therapies and cures utilizing the patient voice. All right, so before we get into some of the really neat data from the registry, I just want to go ahead and repeat this slide in terms of the registry. You know, we saw this from Chris earlier. This is how we protect participant privacy and confidentiality in the registry. So because we are online, patients access the registry using a secure web-based portal. The portal then automatically assigns the ID to your data. So there's no need for a human to be involved at all in this. There is no study team, there's no doctor. The system does this for us. And then of course, those details are stored in a separate location that is secure. And then as you fill out the modules and the surveys, all of that data is assigned to your unique ID, similar to a clinical trial. And then what we really love about our program is that we have advisory groups made up of researchers, clinicians, and patient stakeholders. And so they help us decide how to use that data. And we're also building a data sharing portal for later this year for researchers. Okay, so now the good stuff. This is the data from our 2021 annual report. We intend to create one of these every year to show you the impact of the data we're collecting. As of this week, over 2,600 individuals have signed up to participate with us. They are from all over the United States. They have many different stages of disease. As you can see, though, there is a need to increase both racial and gender diversity in the program, and that's one of the foundation's goals for the next year. Here's an example of how we use the data. So these are results from our family history module. And so genetics of ADPKD tells us that an affected parent has a 50% chance of passing that gene on to each child. But what we want to know is, what do these families actually look like? So what we did is we broke it down by number of siblings. And if you look here, let's say someone who has 2 siblings, 45% of those who had 2 siblings, they were the only person in their family with the disease, of their siblings with the disease. And then 20%, all 3 siblings had the disease. So it's just really interesting to see how that falls out. We hope that you'll look and follow the path for your own situation and see how those numbers compare. Okay. And we also have a really great tool for helping to recruit for studies in the registry. So our core questionnaire asks details about disease that would serve as those inclusion criteria for a study. So kidney function, age, symptoms. The system will then automatically create cohorts for us, or groups of patients that might qualify for that study. Again, we don't know those names. We just know that we found 250 people who may qualify for a study, and we ask the portal to send you an email that tells you more about how to participate. And what's important for us is that we leave the power in that individual's hand to decide if they want to participate or not in that study, or reach out to the study team. We just want to make sure that we spread awareness of the research that is ongoing. And here's another example of how we use the data. So this is a poster that our research team presented at the National Kidney Foundation annual meeting this past April. So this is where we're really starting to reveal insights into how pain impacts those with ADPKD. We used a validated pain scale. We asked about sharp pain, dull pain, and fullness or discomfort. And then we broke that data down by those who were pre or post-transplant and at different stages of disease. And what we learned is that while we do see some differences in impact of pain on quality of life based on what stage of disease someone might be in, pain has an impact on many, many PKD patients across the spectrum. So we believe that knowing more about kidney pain will help us to inform clinicians about the symptoms that impact their patients' daily lives. Okay, it is also important to our team that we continue to find ways to show participants how we're using their data and what we're learning. So this here is our dashboard. So if you are a participant, you would log in to your platform, and you would see the dashboard and get an idea of some of the data we're learning and then where you fall in there. We also have a quarterly newsletter. So this highlights a few charts. It talks about why that data matters. It shows a preview of what's coming next. And then we also share some goals for the quarter with the participants. And then, as I mentioned before, we have an annual report every year. So not only do we try to present some of the data in this report, but we pull in participant testimonials or narratives that help us match those tables and figures to a real individual's life and the impact the disease is having on them and their families. So we try to do a mix to really help us all understand what we're seeing in this data. Okay, so for those of you who may not already be signed up, I hope you consider it. I'm just going to walk you through how that process works. So this is our homepage, pkdcor.org/registry. And you can go here, either sign in or sign up. If you go to sign in, there is a place to direct you to sign up. This is where you would log in if you're already a participant. So we ask you for your name, your email, and a password. We ask a little bit about you, your gender, your date of birth. We then ask you for your phone or address. These are optional, but at the least, we'd like to know what city and state you live in. And then this is the consent form. So as Chris mentioned, there's a lot of really important information in this form. And there's a lot to scroll through. So what I recommend you do is you click at the top here where you can just download a PDF and take your time and read it and ask questions before you come in here and check these boxes and agree to participate. All right. In addition to the registry, another one of our recruitment tools is our ACT alerts. So this is an email listserv that you can opt into. We have one for autosomal dominant PKD and autosomal recessive PKD. And whenever we hear of new studies that are enrolling, we will try to send an email to let you know. Sometimes we will do it based on where the study sites are located in the US. Sometimes we'll just send it to everyone and let them know. And then, as Dr. Murug mentioned, we have our clinical studies tool. As fantastic as clinicaltrials.gov is, it can be a little hard to sort through all that information. So we've done our best to help filter that down for you and share with you what participation looks like in a clear way. So you go to find a study, which is at the top of that page there. You have the option to fill out some details to help you sort through the studies. What is your diagnosis? What is your latest kidney function? How old are you? And then we'll pull up a list of studies that we believe you may qualify for. We also have an option to sort by location. So there's a lot of studies on there right now. We do our best to keep it updated, and please check it out and let us know what you think. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much. I can't say enough how important it is that patients like you sign up for research to participate for the registry, for clinical studies. We wouldn't know half of the things we know now about the disease without those who sign up to participate. So thank you so much. And hopefully we can answer some questions now. All right, let's start for Dr. Murug. So Dr. Murug, you are a clinician, you see patients. When you are encouraging someone to sign up for a study, what's one of the most important things that you tell them?
Well, I think it's, a lot of times the study, when you learn about it, seems exciting. And I think that what is important to recognize that in all these studies, these are experiments, right? So there often are side effects. And I think that sometimes people may get blinded by that hope, that this may be it, and not to take into consideration appropriately the potential adverse events that may happen. So I think that being aware that this may be a breakthrough, but being aware that these drugs could potentially hurt you, and wait this early and trying to make the decision whether to participate or not, I think it's important. The other thing I think that is important, and Chris mentioned that, is the time commitment. One needs to realize that it's not, if you subscribe for a study, it's not just you'll do it, and a couple of weeks later, perhaps you may withdraw. You can do it, and always you can do it, but it's just a waste of time of the study team. It's the waste of resources, and it's waste of your time, as a participant. So I think that taking into consideration all those things that might be important, including the time commitment, because sometimes people don't realize how much time it may take, is important before making the final decision whether to participate or not.
And Chris, here's one for you. Why is it so important that participants' privacy and confidentiality is protected? Why does that data need to be secure? Why are we all trying so hard to do that?
Well, I hope the answer to that question is somewhat self-evident, right? I mean, obviously, I think there's a lot of reasons there. I think the first one is that when you're contributing to these studies, these are, as Mike said, these are experiments. There may be learning things that haven't been learned before, you may not know condition, and it's important that that data be private so that it's really only used for its research purposes, shared back to you if it's important for your health conditions, but that it's not available to your insurance company. It's not available to somebody trying to sell something. It's just really critical that that information be maintained in privacy and confidentiality, because its only intended use is for its research purpose. And I think we all know, like any of us, as we participate in clinical studies from time to time that violate the trust of the participant, it's very unlikely that people will participate in clinical trials. And so it's just really critical to the entire endeavor to maintain that trust relationship.
I see a few questions here that I can answer also. So we had someone ask where they can get the annual report from the registry. So that is available on our website, pkdcure.org/registry, or if you go to the PKD research exhibit in our PKDCON platform, it is linked there as well. And then there's also a question here about merit reviewers. So for anyone who's familiar with this, a merit reviewer, many organizations will use a stakeholder to help us assess the potential impact of research grant applications. And we at the foundation have a group that is made up of both researchers and stakeholders. It's called the Stakeholder Reviewer Panel. And we open up applications for that panel every October. So that will be coming out soon. And I believe the website is pkdcure.org/stakeholder panel reviewer. But feel free to message me directly on the platform, and I can also send you some information. Just checking on our questions here. Okay. Dr. Mrugh, we have someone who's very astute and noticed that the bardoxolone methyl Falcon clinical study used to have a smaller number of participants they wanted to enroll, and they upped it to 850. Could you tell us why that might happen?
I don't know. This is an internal decision, of the person that ran the study.
Well, we'll do our best to help them recruit. All right. Okay, any other questions? Let's see. We have, what percent of the 2,500 enrolled in the registry are PKD patients? All of them, 100%. We ask that anyone who has a diagnosis of AD-PKD or suspects that they have the disease to please sign up with us. The core questionnaire asks that question: do you have an official diagnosis? And if you don't, we ask you some questions about why you think you might have AD-PKD. Is it symptoms? Is it family history? So those are questions that we're really interested to know, and we hope that you consider signing up. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. Any final thoughts, Chris, before we sign off?
Well, I'll make one. I think it relates to the comment that Dr. Mrugh made about time and trial participation, and that is one I think the really exciting trends we're seeing in a lot of clinical trials is much more engagement with the patients and participants who might be involved or consider being involved in the trial in the design phase, to really understand, is this trial design something feasible for the patient population in which the treatment will be studied? And so I just, again, encourage you, if you ever have the opportunity to weigh in or be involved in a panel to get feedback about the design of a trial, that you consider that, because again, as I think we've highlighted, time is one of the really critical factors for both the participants and the study sponsors. and this trend of going and actually talking to the people who would be involved in the study to understand what design might work for them and their family or what designs won't work is, I think, a really important trend. And I hope we can all support that. And that'll, I think, also make it at least lower the barrier to participation in trials and make it a better experience. So just a last 2 cents on that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the foundation does have a volunteer opportunity called our Community Reaction Panel. And one of the goals for that group is to put ideas about protocol design for studies in front of them and get thoughts. So if you're interested in giving some feedback and getting your voice into the design of clinical studies, please go do check that out and consider volunteering for that role. All right, Dr. Mrugh, any final thoughts?
Well, I would like to say that from my view, I see Pkd Foundation doing outstanding job in trying to educate patients, caregivers, which I think is very important because the information empowers ones, to make the right decisions. You cannot have physician to decide for you. So learning and be able, be empowered to make the best decisions for yourself. That's I think very important. And the foundation here is a catalyst, to get that information to right hands. So, so I would like to thank, what, you and Chris, what you are doing and the foundation, because I think it's outstanding. And then I would like to encourage patients and families of PKD patients to try to seek that information and then use it to your own benefit using your common sense. And thank you, everybody who participated in clinical studies. Thank you.